Tonight, on behalf of Covered Bookstore, I'm so very pleased to welcome Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan to the Brattle Theater. In just a moment, I'm going to turn the introductions over to my friend and colleague, Ned Hinkle. For those of you who don't know him, Ned Hinkle is the creative director of the Brattle Theater. He's worked extensively in both film and music industries and currently handles all the programming, marketing, and special events for this, New England's most premier independent movie theater. Mr. Hinkle has previously interviewed the likes of Jessica Lange, Geraldine Chaplin, RoboCop's Paul Verhoeven, David Lynch, and a very feisty Chuck Palahniuk. I'm so very pleased that he's part of the event tonight. I'll turn the microphone over to him now. Please join me in welcoming Ned Hinkle.
Thanks, Heather. Hi, everybody. As Heather said, I'm Ned Hinkle. I'm going to keep this brief because I know why you're all here, not to listen to me ramble on. But for those of you who somehow have missed it, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our authors tonight. Guillermo del Toro is a writer, producer, director of films, which is why we're so pleased that he's here tonight. He's been involved in filmmaking since he was a teenager. Of course, his first breakout success came with Chronos in 1993. And since then, he's become one of the most lauded genre filmmakers in the world with films such as Devil's Backbone, which we will be screening later on tonight, Hellboy, Mimic, and the multi-Oscar winner Pan's Labyrinth. The Strain trilogy marks his debut as an English language author. Chuck Hogan, I have to read this directly from this press packet that I got because the first line it was so appealing to me. Chuck Hogan was a video store clerk in Boston when his first thriller, The Standoff, was published to critical acclaim and went on to become a national bestseller, translated into 14 international editions. Of course, his book, Prince of Thieves, his fourth novel, won the Hammett Award and has been, of course, just recently released as The Town, Ben Affleck's new film. And also it was called one of the 10 best books of the year by Stephen King. So I'm very pleased. I was a fan of the first book in the Strain trilogy, and I'm very pleased to welcome Chuck and Guillermo here tonight to talk a little bit about The Fall. So come on out, guys. Thank you both for coming here. We're really excited for this reading, for this talk. Heather sent me an email asking if this was something we might want to do, and I said yes. In fact, if I had to, I would go to the effort of actually having a child so that I could promise it to Harvard Bookstore if they let us do this event. So thank you very much for coming out and joining us for this. First, I have a question for the audience, which is, how many of you have read The Strain, the first book in the trilogy? Uh-oh. All right. Well, that's good. But we'll try to avoid spoilers as much as possible. But I can't really be held accountable. So I have been held accountable for spoilers on this stage before. So I try to avoid them as much as possible. But just to kick things off, I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then we'll open it up as quickly as possible to you folks, because I'm sure you have many yourselves. So guys, I am curious. Guillermo, it seems like your world in general, in all the films and the work that you do, is very much depicting how thin a veil there is between fantasy or horror and what we would consider reality.
Yes.
And that's very clear in these books. And
fantasies, for example, like that I fit in this chair.
Yes, exactly.
The reality is, I'm about to fall in my ass. I really, if I do, please don't laugh.
We could stand.
I'm having the muffin effect.
I hate to say it, but I know exactly how you feel. Just be thankful you're not sitting down there.
Oh,
one of those, So, Chuck, as a collaborator who works in a very realistic style, for lack of a better word, how did you approach, or how did the two of you approach collaborating on these books? And kind of, I'm curious about the division of labor, if there even was one. How did it come about?
Well, I think the original idea was which was yours, was to sort of take horror and more procedural writing and put it together, and that's basically how I became involved initially. Since then, it's definitely become a little more squishy than that. Promiscuously squishy. But the division of labor is, we meet at the beginning of the book, and we have kind of a few days of long breakfast where we just talk about it, and I ask a lot of questions, And from that, we sort of grow out an outline, treatment, and then emails back and forth. You know, it's just it's always exciting to get that you know, to have the email box open up with something from Guillermo, and it just, you know.
Same here.
Yeah, just kicks it, you know, keeps it going.
We call dibs when we do the outline. Immediately, each calls a chapter or a portion, and he says, "I want to write this. I want to write that." Unfortunately, we haven't never struggled for one. I mean, it's a pretty clear, you know, sort of taste thing. You know, we say this and that, and then we rewrite each other. You know, each of us generates a number of chapters and fleshes them out, and then I get Chuck's chapters and he gets mine, and we rewrite them. We rewrite each other, and we've never had an argument. It's really incredibly harmonious. You know, both of us have lost chapters and stuff we have done. But it's never been an argument. I mean, for this last book, for The Fall, I wrote an entire arc for a character that is not there anymore. You know, and I sent the whole arc to Chuck and David Highfield, the editor, and we ended up cannibalizing all those chapters into little portions here and there in the book. And I think that you know, I think in the first book there was one pass where we had written everybody in, and Chuck had the idea of making Gabriel Bolivar a porn star.
Yeah, well, like more of like a porn entrepreneur.
Entrepreneur, but
entrepreneur.
He went into shocking detail. and I got it, and I said, Chuck, let's go back to our rock stars, because they were lurid.
There's still
Boogie Nights moments.
Yes, there's still plenty of detail to go into.
Without the monologue.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Actually, you mentioned calling dibs. I'm curious, particularly, I guess, in the first book, what were some of the favorite, you know, parts that you guys were talking about? Would you be able to choose, like, what was your favorite thing that you called dibs on? I'm curious.
I mean, I initially called dibs on, for example, everything about Treblinka, you know, the Zetrakian arc. That was the first thing that we exchanged. And Chuck came up with, entirely on his own, with Fed the Exterminator on the first book. And then I rewrote Fed, and in the second book, I wrote a character without telling Chuck. There was this absolutely earnestly written, for real, no chuckles, no nudging, mask, retired 60-something-year-old ex-mask Mexican wrestler. Because I wanted to have a completely earnest, no postmodern winking moment where a guy that has failed and failed and failed again in his life could put a mask on and take a vampire on. And it's a very beautiful, moving moment. And you know, but it's like that. And Chuck called dibs immediately on a lot of the stuff that he liked the most in the outline of it.
But I felt strongly that we needed a part for Ron Perlman, even though it's just a book. Yeah, so that's largely how the Exterminator came about.
I think that could have been one of my questions later on, like which part is Ron Perlman?
You ruined it.
No.
I did.
One of the things that, well, actually, you know what, since there were several people who haven't read the first book, do you mind just encapsulating quickly the kind of premise of what happens?
I'll tell you how it was born, and that encapsulates pretty much something. I became addicted. I mean, I think that some of the best writing in the last 7-8 years has been on cable. And I think things like Breaking Bad, which is a masterful series, things like Deadwood, which came up with an absolutely intoxicating use of language, and things like The Sopranos, blah, blah, blah. And then The Wire, which is the most solid piece of dramaturgy in audiovisual form, I think, in years. And I was completely enraptured by McNulty. You know, I was like, what a great, because I love when, you know, there's a movie called Memories of Murder, that a Korean movie, fantastic movie, that also deals with how crappy real life is. You know, my father was kidnapped in '98, and people ask me about it, and they imagine Russell Crowe's Proof of Life or something. It's pretty crappy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like haphazard and pathetic, and things happen that are unexpected. And the first impulse I had is, I've been trying to make these vampires nasty, parasitic, brutal for decades. I started thinking about them when I was a kid. And I thought, wouldn't it be great to do a procedural thriller that is like a CDC investigation in earnest, and they uncover this vampiric lore, you know, and vampiric plot, which is, but it's shockingly, the institutions are shockingly inefficient. And that I generated a 12-page beat document detailing first, second, and third book, and I seeked out for a partner. But that's essentially what it is you're going to encounter the nastiest vampires, and you're going to find details of everyday life. One of the things I was very earnest about was that we tracked each of the guys that survived, and tracked in painful detail the domesticity that is destroyed when they go back and vampirize the family. And that's what you're going to encounter when you read the book, is incredibly horrible, incredibly brutal moments of domestic abuse at the hands of those you love, and general brutality for all ages. And cool stuff.
Well, the detail is wonderful. It's one of the great things about the books, and the biological detail that has gone into, and historical detail with Treblinka, and of course the sort of medical and criminal procedural aspect of it is fascinating. And had you been researching those different aspects of it for a long time, or Chuck, did you find yourself doing a lot of that kind of?
Chuck did a lot of heavy lifting on CDC procedural stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd covered a little bit of that in a previous book called The Blood Artist, but all the biology and all that obviously was left to Guillermo. Has been, as he says, living with these vampires for many, many years. So it's very exciting and a little unsettling to be able to call him with a specific question about the vampire, and he's not well, I think it's no, Chuck, they are very, very hot, and the blood is white because of this, and it's great. I mean, it's like the most incredible resource that a writer could have.
I always was obsessed when I saw King Kong or Godzilla. I was always thinking, what happens when they take a shit? I imagine a taxi cab taking a taking a curve and going, oh my God! Because I love dealing with monsters in biological ways. Like we had a scene in Mimic where they find the crapper for the giant insects, but I always say, what do they feel when they eat? What do they feel? The victims, you read about all this displaced oral pleasure in Victorian vampiric fiction, and I always was thinking, no, I've given blood, and it's not pleasant.
Right.
So giving 3 pints of blood all at once by a machine that is morphologically an accurate parasitic form is not going to be sexy at all. No. It's going to be shriveling, if anything. And when I tried to depict, one of the things I think we did in equal brutality was to depict each or suckings in the books with really immersive detail that you really feel it's there.
Right.
In Treblinka, I did a map, and I did as much research and photography and all that to be able to talk about it as accurately as possible.
I do want to open up to the audience, so I'm just going to take one more question, which I might steal from the audience, which is, since it was in some ways inspired by television drama, and obviously you're a filmmaker, have you thought about adaptation for the screen, and are there prospects, and what do you?
Oh, in fact, I tell you, the first time I thought of it, I thought long arc, I had at the time a deal at Fox, and I went to Fox and I explained them in great detail, gave them the 12-page document, said it would be limited. We would do only 3 seasons and then close the shop, even if it's successful. And they listened with great attention, and they said, we would be interested if you can turn it into a comedy. and that was the last bit of comedy I heard.
Yeah.
and so I left, and I really wanted to experience absolute freedom. I knew this was going to be, if we went audiovisual, it would be a big production. And we were going to start hearing, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. And the book is full of you cannot do that moments.
Right.
You know, and I really didn't want to feel, I turned to my team and I said, you know what, because they said, oh, we're going to NBC, we're going to, and I said, we're not going anywhere. I'm going to just write it. And then it was suggested that, and there's a part of American lingo and efficiency and procedural stuff that still escapes me. You know, I write in a different rhythm. I cannot say, give me 50 mgs of, you know, NPR and this and that and CDC and all these things. And Americans are great at those acronyms. Mexicans, we take 10 minutes to say, hi, how are you? and so I started reading books, and I stumbled on Blood Artists, and I was like, I had researched the CDC and the subway for Mimic extensively, and scouted New York for Mimic extensively, because I wanted the giant insects to be in the real world. And I was very impressed by the CDC stuff, by the drawing of the characters. And then I read Prince of Thieves, and I was like a quivering fan. You know, one thing that is worth noticing is we wrote the first book on a handshake. We didn't have a contract.
Yeah, we had met once, about 4 years ago now. And yeah.
Didn't know I was a terrorist. Carlos, AKA the fat man.
No, because when we started working on it, my agent said, you know, he has this movie coming out that's my agent had seen it 4 months before it came out. He said, this movie's coming out, Pan's Labyrinth. It's amazing. And I couldn't understand what he was saying. It's like Pan's Labyrinth. It was like one word, and I had no idea what the project was. But I was like, you know, I don't care. This outline is. The first page and a half sold me on the outline, and then we've been working on it for about 4 months, and then Pan's Labyrinth came out, and I saw it, and it was one of those holy shit moments. Like I gotta, you know, step up my game, and from that point on until I don't know when, I was pretty convinced that I was gonna get the phone call, you know, saying, you know, we tried it, and it was you know. It's a good try, and we're gonna go with someone else. So I'm just happy to be here. Put it that way.
Well, we're happy to have you.
Oh, thank you. Actually, I should say I'm really happy to be right here. I mean, The Brattle is, it's been a huge part of my life and my wife's life. And we came here. My first movie we ever saw was Clash by Night. We sat over there. The great Robert Ryan, and she was a Marilyn Monroe fan at the time. My wife was, and we've just, you know, so to be up on stage. And with, you know, obviously a world-renowned filmmaker.
Yo,
awesome. So, you know, long live The Brattle. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for coming here, and I just want to ask. I'm kind of curious how you guys like work the book, like how you guys structure it. Like if one of you work on a certain character or like half of the book. I was just kind of curious. You probably could ask that a lot.
It was the main arc was structured in that outline, in the 12 pages. I wanted very much for us to have a map that we knew where we were going, and one of the things that I wanted to do was that characters that start really well on the first book, you end up disliking, or that you don't go the normal bestseller route, and characters that you think are bad guys in the first or second book end up transforming themselves in the third book, and at the end of the day that you understand the master, the main vampire, and hopefully his ending is somewhat tragic. But the rest was pretty much what we detailed, I think.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say about that is, in terms of the outline, it was already clear that there'd be no first of all, that it's definitely 3 parts, three books, as you said, there'll be no more, but also that the middle book is not just, connective, it's not just sort of a bridge from the exciting beginning to the exciting conclusion. The second book absolutely has its own beginning, middle, and end, and that was really, it was really exciting to know that we weren't just, drawing a line from 1 to 3, but 2 is, I think, it's its own kick-ass book in and of itself.
And we were very clear also, and the editor and the publishing house were happy about this, that if you pick the second book, you didn't read the first one, still, it's a self-standing book. You understand everything, you know who everybody is, and the same is going to be true to some degree on the third book, that you should be able to read it independently. And if you want to know more, go back.
Even 10 years ago, vampires, like there were some about, but they weren't as ubiquitous as they are now. I'm thinking like, I guess there was Buffy, whatever. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious.
And there was Blade.
Oh yeah.
Alphabetically, man.
So I'm just curious, like, what do you think about this, like, current vampire zeitgeist thing that's going on now, number 1, and number 2, like, does True Blood bother you guys in the context of doing your own vampire thing, or do you like that this is just a really popular sort of thing going on right now?
I mean, nothing bothers us. No, not at all. I mean,
except my pen.
I mean, on the one hand, as we were talking earlier, it's such a malleable myth. It's the vampire's been around forever, and it can be so many things. At the same time, as I said, we first met, I believe it was 4 years ago this month, because I saw that the New York Film Festival is starting this weekend, and so it was this
it was
current
not there
surge.
yet.
No, not at all, and it hadn't. I mean, it wouldn't have mattered anyway, because your vampires really are absolute. We're taking the vampire thing all the way back to the beginning, to the original folkloric roots, pre-romanticism,
Polidori.
Pre-Polidori, right?
No, and werewolves. 4 years ago, werewolves were wearing shirts. No, really were. And I mean, Twilight was taking off, but it was taking off as books. All I was hearing there was a Mormon horror author, and I was, I imagine someone was selling cheese. I mean, I didn't understand. I didn't understand what was going on. No one expected it, and it was not done as a reaction to it. I've been obsessed by vampire folklore since I was a kid. I mean, I was a really weird kid. And I was reading folklore books already at the age of 7 or 8. And I've been reading about Hindu vampires, Mesopotamian myth, Greek chronicles of vampirism, Roman vampires, Mexican vampires, Eastern European vampires. And around the age of 10 or 11, I came up with this on this description about certain strigoi, certain vampires in Eastern Europe that had a stinger under the tongue, and that they projected it, and they had no sharp teeth and this and that. And each vampire is fascinating. The Aswang with the long tongue, or the Penangalang with the hanging intestines. I mean, they are such florid creatures of myth, but it stuck with me, that, and I started thinking about the biology of those guys, and it grew from there. I think that it's good to know what's going on, but I watch less and less stuff in the genre that I like. I was voracious as a kid, but as an adult, people get surprised that I watch more comedy, animation, drama than I do horror anymore. Because I find it harder to get interested. It's sort of like a gynecologist reading Penthouse, it's like, oh, I see, Miss January has displaced labia on the right, and there is an occlusion on it becomes, but when it happens and I get excited, I love it. but it's rarer. And you know, people get surprised when I tell them I've tried now twice to watch the X-Files, and I can't, because all I can think is Kolchak. You know, and Buffy, I watched Hush, and I loved, Doug Jones was in it, so I was entranced, but you know, and then I connect like crazy with Firefly, you know, so, you know, it's like, I don't know, I don't do homework. I'm 45, and if I don't get excited by something, I don't finish it, fuck it, you know. I'm too fat, and my arteries are clogged. I'm gonna use the time in a good way. So, you know, we were not aware of this trend.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm curious, as a director, what's your take on the 1932 version of Dracula with Bela Lugosi as opposed to the Spanish language one that they were filming at night at the same time?
You know, I'm going to confess something about my least favorite vampire is the Lugosi one. I mean, it really never did it for me. All I saw was an uncle in a cape. Really never. And I'm a huge Universal fan. I've never said this, you know, probably my street cred just went down 10 points. But it never did. I mean, I was, as a kid, I was fascinated by Udo Kier as Dracula. I was like, I find him repellent and innocent and sexy and evil and everything at the same time. I always loved Christopher Lee as just like a steam-rolling vampiric machine. And so, you know, when Lugosi came out, I didn't react. I mean, when I saw it as a kid, it didn't. You know, the sets are great. I don't have a tendency to. The Spanish one has more fluid camera movements and all of that, but I'm not. Neither of them. You know, and then, for example, the first time I saw Francis Coppola's Dracula, the first time I was, what is this? It's so strange. And then I came out and I was scratching my head, and now I'm completely addicted to it. I mean, I watch it religiously. I own one of the original helmets of the wolf suit, and I have the original cane, and I'm painting model kits of Gary Oldman. So, and I you know, I don't know what attracts me, and I love vampires now and then that are unsuspecting. I love the vampire in Night Stalker, you know, in the Kolchak movie. I think it's Janos is very powerful and very brutal, and you know, you never know. I'm sorry to disappoint, but it never peeled my banana. To use a scholarly term. Yeah, I mean, Kolchak was the man. They were always organic to this, and Kolchak had to do with it. I'll tell you, the tracking horror, obviously, if you see Dracula in its context, it was a very modern novel. It was a novel that was using cutting-edge technology. It was of the time, with crazy machinery like typewriters and telegraphs and voice recording devices. It was like cutting edge. And I love that. And then, but the first time I encountered it as a contemporary reader was on Richard Madison and I Am Legend, where it was happening right there. It was bringing it to urban America. Then Stephen King brought it to suburban America, or you know, rural America somewhat with Salem's Lot, and it was fascinating. And then what was the seal for me was A Vampire in Vegas, conceived by Jeff Rice on Night Stalker and written by Richard Madison. And the fact that the procedural stuff of Kolchak and Tony Vincenzo arguing about whether they published the note or not, the back and forth, the vulgarity of the work of Kolchak was imbued in the tale. That's what started. So it was always there. And I love. I'm a hypochondriac. I'm not a doctor, but I can tell you about symptoms. You know, it's like when they say, if you want to know about diets, ask the fat guy. You know, it's the same with hypochondriacs. I'm not a doctor, but I could resuscitate somebody if needed. You know, what we're trying to do is we're trying to not to think even about developing them, because then we're going to be writing with that in mind. You know, it's really horrible to be thinking, oh, what can we do to make it more a movie, more, we don't want to do that. I mean, what I love is the freedom that you can end up a book with somebody just closing a door. And that's, if you write it correctly and beautifully, you don't need anything bigger than that to happen. And so but he came up with Ron Perlman. He said, Fett should be Ron Perlman. And that's why he read the first book.
Well, that's what happens when you have a fan as a co-writer. I start casting it. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, we're sort of deep in the middle of the third one now, and that's just the priority is to get finished and then and get it out and get people reading it.
Yeah, and I think that if you see the trailers we did for the first book, I would love some of the casting ideas were there. Roy Dotrice. I would love Roy Dotrice to play Satrakian. He's a fantastic actor. And to have Roy Dotrice and Ron Perlman again after Beauty and the Beast, it would be a geek dream. He's saying that seeing Hellboy 2 and seeing some of the designs and themes and moments in it, he said this is a guy that deeply connected with Shadow of the Colossus, the video game. Absolutely correct. I think that the moment with the Elemental is Shadow of the Colossus, is the fact that when you win, you lose. This idea that every time you take any of the colossi, you are essentially ending the last of a breed, the last of a race. So as you progress in the game and you're winning, the world is losing. So I thought that game was incredibly haunting, as was Eco. And before them, in the prehistory of CD-ROMs, there was a great game called Gadget that was equally intoxicating. And I'm a gamer. I'm very proud to say I'm old enough to have been. I've been a gamer since the Telepong. It was like, I was there. I'm that old, and I've been playing games since then until now. And I think that they are a narrative art form, and that many of them contain haunting, powerful, immersive passages of narrative. And I believe that soon there will be a masterpiece in that genre, if not already with Shadow of the Colossus. I love that, and I think that people talk about adapting it into a movie, and I say play the game. It's really perfect. I mean, part of the game, you cannot replicate the wandering, and 90% of the beauty of it is just to get lost in the landscape and the atmosphere.
So, Twitterers in the audience, at the risk of starting a feud between Roger Ebert and Guillermo del Toro, please report to Roger Ebert that video games are, in fact, an art form. Thank you.
I believe they are, and I think that you can only really discuss them the more you play them. You cannot just pile them all up and shoot them up. First-person shooter games, which I love, and I'm pretty good at them. But I think that is not all that. And even then, there are moments in, for example, Call of Duty, World at War, when you are in the subway of Berlin, and the Nazis flood that subway with water, is as good a scene as any movie. And so on and so forth. You go BioShock, full of moments of haunting, Lynchian, Coen Brothers beauty. It's like Barton Fink meets David Lynch on a crowded corner in an Art Deco building. I don't know how to describe it. And meets Ayn Rand, Orwell. It's a really great meeting.
It's true. It is. Okay, who's next? Right here in the front row.
Actually, I wanted to ask a question about Chronos, because this isn't your first foray into the vampire. And I'm always trying to get people to watch that movie. If you haven't seen it, it's probably the sweetest, most lovely. It's kind of like The Secret of Roan Inish of vampire movies.
I like that. And, it's Curly Sue meets Dracula.
Yeah, just the relationship between the grandfather and the granddaughter, and how silent she was, and how deeply layered it was. I was lucky I had a Mexican friend who I could ask about the name Grease, because the character's name is Jesus Grease.
Jesus Gray, yeah.
And And so I guess if you could talk a little bit about that and your approach to that story, which is very beautiful and about, you know, love, familial love versus, you know, what you are doing now.
Gladly. You mind? I'm going to look like Tom Cruise in Magnolia, but I'm going to get up because my ass is going to sleep. and you know, guys, you know, but Chronos is coming out in December by Criterion Collection, you know, and I've been checking the extras. I was checking the extras and getting swag yesterday, and they are fantastic. We did a completely new transfer that was digitally restored to as beautiful an image as it's ever been. And the movie, I grew up a lot of the time. I spent it with my grandmother, who was as Catholic as Pippa, Laurie, and Carrie, you know, and she was very intense. She used to put upside bottle caps on my shoes for me to do penance, and I would bleed in my shoes. And my mother eventually discovered that, and she slapped me into reason. And she talked to her, and they had a big fight. But the thing with the love story with my grandmother is that I loved her in spite of everything. And I thought I like to write children in a different way than people normally write children. I think that I want to keep the mystery of those children intact in the writing. I don't want to know everything. I inform the actor and I trace the character, but I do it visually and with audio. And for example, one of the things that I got a note again and again on Pan's Labyrinth was the girl needed to see the brutality of the stepfather for her to escape into. I said, fuck you, you know, and why? Because the brutality she feels is the first encounter, and she already knows him, and she doesn't need, you know, she understands all that because she's a child that went through war. And then somebody said, you know, but we see her reading very little. Yeah, but you see her tell a fucking story that she invented. And you know, the normal notes you would get from a studio is you would have the girl reading all the time and somebody takes away her books and all that crap. And the same, and I said, you want to know the girl in Pan's Labyrinth? See the decision she takes at the end. That's all. That's all you, I mean, and the same is true with Chronos. I wrote the character of the girl after me. You know, I wanted the girl to love her grandfather, even if he was falling off to pieces and drinking somebody else's blood. And at the end, I wrote her to be completely silent. She's called Dawn. She's called Aurora, which means dawn in Spanish. And it's Dawn that kills the vampire at the end. I won't spoil it for you, but I won't. You will not be affected by this. I assure you. Look into my eyes. You will not be affected by this. But also, I made her say, and this is gonna screw with your brains. I had her say a single word in the whole movie, and I needed to know what that word would be and what the function of that word would be. So all this and more in the Criterion Collection. And the way I approached the vampire, I wanted the vampire to be the victim. The disc includes, I was surprised to find, we found all, not my notebook, which is a tragedy. I gave my notebook to Jim Cameron in a drunken stupor, and he can't find it. So one day we'll find it and there will be another double dip. But we found my notes to the crew about alchemy, about Gothic, about all of this. And I found the alchemical notes. I was like, I like that guy. You know, they were solid, and we were trying to do an alchemical approach to vampirism. And their Catholic imagery about drinking the blood and eating the flesh struck me as a child very strong. And the parallels, it's a very Catholic movie. It's a very Catholic or lapsed Catholic movie, because I'm sure you won't see it on a Sunday church. But it is full of all that. It's full of loss, as will be Devil's Backbone when you see it tonight. But it's I don't know if this gives you a hint. Now I can see it again. Now circulation is occurring again.
Yeah, he was asking, he's an aspiring writer, and he's asking how we go about getting into a creative mood, both tangibly and creatively, right? You know, I've been doing this, you know, full time for a long time now, for many years, and I think so much of writing is learning how to write and learning what works for you and making the process. It's as much of an exploration as it is the words on the page, and it's not anything that anyone else is going to know about or care about, but there's a real psychological, you know, trip that you have to go through to arrive at whatever sort of routine or groove or whatever you know, that works for you. So that's part of the journey. If you're ever struggling with that, that's not a bad thing. That's part of, you know, that's how it should be. For myself, I just, you know, what works for me is getting up as early as I can and getting to it as quickly as I can. That way I don't have, you know, anything else rattling around in my head. And definitely at the end of the day, preparing myself for the next day as much as possible. So I'm not coming to the next page and it's blank and I've got to, you know, get myself back to that place. It's, I try to hit the ground running every morning. But you have a completely different process.
Well, yeah, I try to, the first thing I do is I try to get different things going at the same time as a writer, because the worst thing you can do is face the blank page on the same project 2 days, 3 days in a row. Because, you know, you become Jack Nicholson in The Shining. I'm fucking typing, you know, and the family hates you. Whenever you hear this sound, I mean, and it's not fruitful. So, you know, I try to have a screenplay, a novel, a short story that I want to try, this and that, an introduction to a book, a prologue, whatever. And every morning I write, no matter what, I write 2 hours, no matter what. Good, bad, crappy, throwaway. That's incredibly useful to know that you're going to have to do your quota. It's like, see, it's like going to the gym, which sounds really weird from me. But I know because I don't go to the gym, because I went and I stopped going. And it's the same thing with writing. You don't write one day, you lapse into not writing. So if you do it, you have to be disciplined, I think, on research and note-taking. I carry a notebook with me almost everywhere, and I take a note quickly I dictate on the iPhone, or I make a quick note in what I call my leather notebook, which is this one, you know. And then I put it at night. I put it on my notebook, and those are things that are really useful. As far as the craft, I think you'll learn from reading. There are very few nuggets of wisdom in manuals about how to write. Now and then, there's a few that I like. I love the simplicity but brutality of Elmore Leonard's 10 Rules that came out last year. There's 1 or 2 that you will never forget. Like every time I try to say anything but the character says, he says, don't say, whispered Joe quietly. No, he said Joe. And then the answer is, you know, she said, he said, that's it. Don't say hushed into her ear. No, he said, that's crap. And then he says, never use the word suddenly. And then, you know, those are very simple rules, but all of them are really, really great. He's saying that there's the Catholicism in the movies, but there's also sort of a fetishistic recurrence about pathology, insects, gears, and so forth, and peppered with moments of transcendence. And did we want it to have moments of transcendence in the book, and if so, which ones are they, and so forth? Did I understand that? All right, I didn't hear shit about the last part you said. Huh? The framework. Well, you know, I love clockwork as a fetish. You know, I have many fetishes. I love the color amber, the color steel blue. I love the contrast between them. I love clockwork. I love things in jars. I love Catholic imagery. I do get off on that. You know, but in the book, I don't try to put them. I don't go like, yeah, there is a clockwork moment. But the moments of transcendence, I distinctly remember in the Treblinka episode with Cetrakian, there's a moment where he's running, escaping the camp after the revolt. and he's breaking his toes. He has no shoes, and they're breaking as he's running in the stones in the forest. And he keeps running, and he falls, and he's in a panic, and somebody lifts him, and he never knows who it was. And he says, at that moment, he understood that the worst and the best in this world was man, as much as a thing that killed as a thing that saved. That those anonymous hands lifted him, and he never knew, but he had a clear sense of joy in finding that. And one of the things that I like about that character is that when he meets the master, the almost suffocating, facing an evil that big, gave him a sense that there was a good equally big. That, you know, meeting the monster made him believe in angels. You know, so those are moments. In the second book, the wrestler has a gorgeous moment. Satrakan and Fett has beautiful moments. And there are many, many moments like that peppered throughout the book that I think that the part of the essential machinery of Gothic romance is the contrast between absolute beauty and absolute horror. You know, and when people saw Pan's Labyrinth and some people were outraged at the violence, I said it's part of the tale. It's part of the fairy tale. And in the original Cinderella, the sisters did amputate all their toes to fit into the shoe, and the shoe's filled with blood. And I'm sorry, it's part of the original lore of the fairy tale. So that contrast is vital for the spirituality to shine, and not being Oral Roberts. You know, you need the contrast of brutality. Without it, you don't understand. So is the Gothic architecture, like Gothic writing, are based in contrast. You know, Gothic architecture is essentially an architecture of light that has elongated structures much larger than man, with arches that point to heaven to tell you that you are insignificant. But they are contrasting the darkness of sin with shafts of beautiful, pure light. And the same is true for Gothic romance. So that's part of why we do those quirks. So I hope that was a question.
Well, first of all, the town, I'm thrilled with it. I really am. I've seen it 5 times so far. And there'll be... It'll probably be at least 5 more times before it leaves. No, I saw it first in early June when it was mostly finished, except for just like the music and stuff. And I went to New York to see it in a little screening room in like the Sony building or something. And I literally, it was completely surreal for me. And I walked around the city for about 3 hours afterwards, just trying to figure out, because I had been involved in the movie making process before Ben Affleck came in, so I had been very involved and I had been not involved at all. So I really had to unpack a bunch of suitcases to figure out where I was. And then I realized that I really, not only did I really like it, but I thought it was really good. And since that point, I've just been waiting for it to come out so people could see it. And this may be the last night, I'll say it, but it's the #1 movie in America. I mean, that's awesome. That's so awesome. Yeah. Having said that, I really didn't have anything directly to do with the movie, but I'm taking a lot of the ancillary praise. No, but I'm really happy with it. I mean, there were changes, of course, to the plot, but the characters really made the jump from the page to the screen really cleanly, I guess, which that it didn't have to happen that way. So it's been a lot of fun for me. As to the Blood Artist, I don't know. I get it's probably my least read book, and yet it's the book that more people inquire about. Seeing it as a movie. So I have no idea, but it's just at the time I think people, and maybe even myself, I thought, wow, I really kind of blew it, because my first book had been very much this speedy train-like thriller, and then I went off and did this horror. Detective, kind of science fiction, medical, whatever it was. But I probably wouldn't be sitting up here if I hadn't written it. So it's cool.
You would be.
I'm sitting out there. I'd be here.
You know, I think magic realism is a very squirrely, very slippery definition. You know, because essentially, when you're born in Mexico, you're born into it. I mean, like literally, at my house, my father is the squarest man on earth. Is incredibly prosaic. You know, my dad never goes to movies. I don't think he has ever read anything, any fiction in his life, but he has seen UFOs. And he talks about them, you know, like he says, my mother and him and my brothers saw UFOs come out of the sea into a mothership in the clouds. And you ask my dad, let me tell you who my dad is. My dad saw Chronos, and he said, it's a masterpiece, son. I said, you like it? He said, I love it. And I said, but you never got to the movie. He said, oh, trust me, it's a masterpiece. He says, but there's one thing I didn't understand. I said, what was it? What was that golden thing? Which is the central idea of the movie. But my dad, you talk to him and you say, Dad, he's seen ghosts. My mother has seen ghosts. I have heard ghosts. I've seen UFOs. And no one thinks anything about it. And my dad, you say, is it true that you saw UFOs? And he says, yeah, you know, the sea illuminated and they started popping and there was this cigar in the clouds and they were full of lighting and they were going in. And how many? He says, oh, a lot. And, you know, it went on for about 20 minutes and then I went to sleep because they kept just coming. That's my dad. So what I'm saying is magical realism, I think it was more a marketing way of saying this. You know, like when you know and love art movements, you realize that they are all loosely together. You know, the Impressionists, the Pre-Raphaelites, the Cubists. This, you know, yes and no. You know, yes, you can make out a little bit of continuity and this and that, but ultimately, magical realism didn't fit everybody comfortably. Have you read, anybody here have read Juan Rulfo, the Mexican writer? I mean, to me, that's him and Borges are the greatest. I love, and I identify with them because they have an incredible genuine power. And the thing that I have a lot of problems with is that it's like Day of the Dead when you're Mexican. Everybody, when you're morbid, they all go, Day of the Dead. Yeah, well, yeah, but amongst many things. And magical realism is equally slippery for me. You know, we're just really weird people. And I like that. Well, she's asking, what medium do I like the most? And what do I know about Alejandro Iñárritu? Oh, I know enough to blackmail the fuck. I know a lot. But medium, I really am curious about everything. I think that, you know, if I had to define myself as an entity with one word, I would use the word voracity, you know, because I live my life as, you know, really as voraciously as anyone can. I have an urgency to be there, to be doing things, to try everything, you know. I really love I learn from every experience. I'm developing animation with DreamWorks. I'm doing video games. And I'm learning from everything. Writing for video games is an incredible exercise. Writing for fiction, incredible. They're all different. I think the world is a banquet, and you know, you should not have only caviar or Twinkies. You should have caviar-filled Twinkies. Alejandro is an incredible guy, as is Alfonso. But Alejandro is larger than life. You know, Alejandro is a powerhouse. He has this wild auteur hair, and he wears the scarves really cool. I wear a scarf and I look like Toby from Little Lulu, you know. Like Alejandro wears his scarf and he looks like a tormented artist. And there's nothing, Alejandro never speaks calmly. He's always like, you know, it's like, you can be ordering from a menu and he says, the lemonade is like an explosion of taste. It's like he's hyper. I'm like the quiet one when he's around, you know. And I think he is a guy that was born a filmmaker, and he was, you know, when we met. One thing Alejandro that few people know is Alejandro was the voice of one of the main channels on TV in Mexico. He was the announcer, like, this is CNN. That Alejandro was this is CNN for one channel in Mexico. And you know, I used to crack up because when I was talking to him about editing Amores Perros, he would say something, and I just heard that guy on TV. But, you know, we are very good friends. We just produced a movie together called Beautiful with Javier Bardem. Alfonso Alejandro and I went into it. I think it's his best film, as far as I'm concerned. And I absolutely adore it. And we've been working. He went to Pan's Labyrinth when I was done with the edit. I said, well, I'm shipping the edit tomorrow. He sat and started watching, and he says, there's 15 minutes of crap in there. I said, no, it's tightly edited. He said, no. And let's order Chinese food and edit all night. And we ordered Chinese food and edited all night. And we took out 15 minutes out of Pan's Labyrinth the last day of editing. And he changes this fucking story, but I'm going to tell you the truth. You know? When Amores Perros, this is the truth, whether he wants to accept it or not. When he was finishing Amores Perros, Alfonso called me and he said, there's this guy, you don't know him, but he's a fucking genius. He just did a brilliant movie, and everybody's trying to help him reduce it 30 minutes if possible. And the only stubborn guy we know that can go and do that, like James Bond of cutting, is you. And so I called Alejandro. I saw the movie. I cried. I crapped my pants. I was blown away. And I called him. I said, you don't know me. I'm Guillermo, and your movie is 20 minutes longer than it should be. And he said, well, if you feel that way, you should show up and work, you know, with me. And I showed up at his doorstep one day, and we worked for 4 days. And, you know, we took out 17 minutes. I still have the tape, and I can prove it. He then went to say we took out 7 minutes, and now he says they were 3 minutes, but quite important. Anything they say, let me tell you, we reorganize the structure. So when they go and say, it was perfectly calculated, my ass! we moved shit around every day, the 4 days. The bank robbery was in another place. But the movie was brilliant from the start. So this guy, you know, have you seen the BBC series Desperate Romantics? You know, there's this character that is Dante Gabriel Rossetti. That's Alejandro. It's like crazy talented, flamboyant. So, you know, you're right to love his work, and he's an adorable man. So, you know, and brilliant, he's always been.
On that note, I do think we have to stop so we can get to the signing, but thank you guys so much, and thank you for coming out, everybody.